She laughed at the beggar at her baby shower. She thought he was nothing more than an interruption, a shadow that didn't belong in her world of balloons, gifts, and smiling faces. But then he took the microphone, and the words that left his lips didn't just silence the laughter in that room, they shattered the image she had built of herself. Because what he spoke wasn't a stranger's story. It was hers. But before that moment, before the beggar's voice filled the room, you need to understand the life she lived. The one that made his words cut so deep. From the outside, it looked like she had built the perfect life. The polished smiles in family portraits. The house with spotless floors and a gleaming front door. The friends who whispered about how lucky she was. And she believed them at least. She tried to. She kept the blinds angled just right so the morning light looked soft in photos. She arranged the books on the coffee table by color, not by story. She practiced her smile in the mirror until it sat on her face like a well-fitted mask. She had married well. That's what everyone said. Her husband was successful, respected, the kind of man people nodded at with quiet admiration. He ordered wine without ever glancing at the price. He shook hands with the kind of confidence that belonged in boardrooms. And Shul, she became the woman others envied, the one with the ring that blinked under chandelier light, the parties where no one ran out of ice, the photographs that looked like happiness even on the days when her chest felt hollow. But beneath the glow was something no one saw, a quiet fear, a gnawing thought that maybe, just maybe, all of it could crumble if people remembered where she came from. That voice haunted her in the quiet moments, when the dishwasher hummed, when the house settled at night, when her husband's breathing turned steady in sleep. A voice that whispered, what if they knew? What if the perfect picture ripped right down the middle? Because she wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't raised with chandeliers or catered dinners. Her childhood was simple, humble. Some would even call it poor. And though she covered those roots with designer clothes and polished manners, they still ran through her like veins under her skin. She recognized discount tags at a glance. She still folded plastic grocery bags and tucked them under the sink. She still counted in her head when she handed her card to the cashier, half expecting numbers to betray her. She remembered the nights when dinner was nothing more than bread and watered-down soup. The classmates who laughed at her hand-me-down shoes. The afternoons she pressed her face against store windows, wishing just once for something brand new. She remembered pretending not to be hungry, pretending not to hear the whispers, promising herself that one day no one would ever laugh at her again. That promise shaped her. She buried the girl she once was and rewrote her story. She learned the rules of the rooms she wanted to enter, where to place the fork, how to speak without revealing too much, how to turn her past into a charming anecdote instead of a confession. She taught herself poise like some people teach themselves a new language. Smile. Nod. Don't flinch when someone mentions background. So now, every gathering mattered. Every outfit, every photo, every laugh at the right moment, it all mattered. Because it wasn't just a celebration. It was proof. Proof that she had made it. Proof that she had left that other life behind. Proof that the little girl with the patched backpack had disappeared, replaced by this woman who sparkled under chandeliers. Still, there were slips, tiny ones. A cousin who showed up uninvited and called her by a childhood nickname. A word choice that didn't fit the room. A smell rain on hot pavement, bleach on wet laundry that dragged her back to that rented kitchen with its flickering bulb. And in those moments, her heart stuttered. because she knew the past wasn't gone. It was patient. It waited for cracks. Her husband never noticed the tension in her shoulders when certain songs played. He didn't see the way her eyes darted to doors in crowded restaurants, as if her old life might walk through them at any moment. He loved the woman she had built, and most days she loved that woman too. But love built on a mask is still a mask, and masks slip when someone touches them with the truth. She told herself she was doing it for her child, for the home she was building, for the family she never had. She told herself that wanting beauty wasn't a crime, that wanting ease wasn't sin. She told herself that if she was generous, if she hosted well, if she kept her voice soft and her posture straight, no one would ask the questions she wasn't ready to answer. She told herself the story so often it almost felt true. Almost. But here's the truth she never said out loud. When a life is built on appearances, it doesn't take much to shake it. Not a scandal. Not even a betrayal. Sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected voice in the crowd. One pair of eyes that recognize the girl beneath the silk. One mouth that speaks a name she thought was buried. And that voice was already on its way toward her, toward the day she wanted to prove to the world that she had finally arrived. Her baby shower, her stage, her perfect moment. And waiting in the wings was the first crack. The day of her baby shower arrived, and from the very first moment it felt less like a family gathering and more like a staged performance. The air itself hummed with careful planning. Music floated gently in the background, the kind of playlist designed to soothe without stealing focus. The scent of roses and vanilla candles mingled in the air, calculated to feel warm but elegant. Nothing was accidental. Nothing was natural. Every detail had been curated. The room had been transformed into a gallery of perfection. Balloons floated gracefully near the ceiling, ribbons draped across tables like soft arcs of light, and every flower arrangement sat perfectly sculpted, as if no petal dared to fall out of place. Satin bows tied the chairs in neat flourishes. Plates shimmered with gold trim. Napkins folded into sharp points, precise as origami. Pastel pinks and creamy whites bloomed everywhere, chosen not only for tradition but for how well they would look in photographs. Even the cake towering, tiered, crowned with sugar roses, looked more like a sculpture than food, something to admire but never touch. And at the center of it all stood her. Draped in silk that shimmered beneath the chandelier light, she was the figure every camera sought. The fabric clung and flowed in just the right places, catching flashes, ensuring not a single photograph could capture her as anything less than radiant. Guests clustered around her like moths circling a flame. Compliments rose and fell in waves. She's glowing. She looks divine. She's blessed. She's perfect. She smiled. She smiled until her cheeks ached, until her jaw locked tight. She smiled because she was expected to. She smiled because her smile was her armor. And though her lips curled upward, inside the weight of it pressed down. The laughter around her didn't sound like joy. It sounded like applause at a play, rehearsed, dutiful, part of the script. The guests weren't just here to celebrate. They were here to witness, to measure, to carry stories back to their workplaces, their families, their neighborhoods, to say, I saw her. I was there. She has it all. And she knew it because she had chosen them. Every name on the guest list had been handpicked not only for connection, but for calculation. Her co-workers who would gossip about the perfect shower until their envy soured. Her husband's colleagues who would shake his hand afterward with greater respect, already calculating his success by the scale of the event. Her friends, polished, curated, the kind of friends who fit seamlessly into the narrative she had built. It wasn't just a celebration. It was an exhibition, a museum of her life, a showcase for the woman she had become. Every clink of champagne glasses, every exaggerated cheer after a baby shower game, every round of applause as another pastel-wrapped gift was opened. It wasn't love. It was performance, and she was the star of the show, like it or not. Still, she drank it in, the attention, the validation, the proof. It filled her like wine, warm and dizzying. Because she remembered the other side. She remembered the nights when no one noticed her, when she was the overlooked girl in patched shoes. She remembered walking invisible, pressed against walls, hoping not to be seen because being seen meant being ridiculed. Now, finally, she couldn't be ignored. Not with chandeliers overhead, not with silk on her body, not with all these eyes fixed on her. But the cruel truth was this. The higher the pedestal, the shakier the balance. The brighter the image, the easier it was to crack. And even as she smiled, even as she posed for photographs, even as laughter swirled around her like music, her heart flickered with unease. She couldn't name it. She couldn't explain it. But she felt it, that fragile sense that perfection could shatter in an instant. Because that's the problem with performances. All it takes is one unscripted moment to ruin everything. And her unscripted moment was already moving toward her. She didn't know it yet. She didn't hear the door opening over the laughter. She didn't see the shift in the air. But the truth was already on its way. And it wasn't wrapped in ribbons. It wasn't dressed in silk. It wasn't bearing gifts or flowers. It was walking toward her in rags. The air inside the room was heavy with celebration, thick like honey. Laughter bounced off the walls, sharp and echoing. Champagne glasses clinked in delicate rhythms, a kind of music in themselves. Camera flashes sparked like fireflies, freezing smiles into moments that could be shared and admired forever. Everything was controlled, rehearsed, safe, predictable, until it wasn't. Because then the door opened. At first it was nothing, just the quiet creak of hinges, almost drowned by chatter and the hum of music. A sound that should have meant nothing, just another server carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, another guest stepping back inside after a phone call. But this time it wasn't nothing. This time the sound carried weight. It carried change. She didn't see it at first. She felt it. A shift in the air, so subtle it was almost invisible. It was as though the entire room had inhaled at once and forgotten how to exhale. A conversation cut off mid-sentence. A burst of laughter died half-formed. Glasses were lowered, mid-toast, frozen in waiting hands. One head turned toward the door, then another, and then, like an invisible wave, every face tilted in the same direction. And at last, her eyes followed theirs. He stood framed in the doorway, a man, thin, almost skeletal, as though the world had been stripping him down piece by piece until little remained but a body and a will to keep moving. His clothes were torn and filthy, stiff from years of dirt and wear. His shoes were more ruin than leather, the soles splitting open like wounds, barely clinging to his feet. His hair was tangled, streaked with gray, brushed only by wind and rain. His skin was marked by hardship, a canvas of creases and weather, but his eyes told a different story. They burned with a clarity that didn't belong to his frame. They were sharp, unyielding, alive. He did not belong here. not in this curated space of silk and satin, where perfume hung heavy in the air and champagne flowed like water. Not among these guests dressed in jewels, shimmering under chandeliers, polished into perfection. Not in this room where every ribbon was tied with intention, every flower chosen with precision, every single laugh rehearsed and performed. He was out of place. And yet, here he was. Whispers spread across the room like sparks catching fire. Who is he? Did someone invite him? He must be lost. Nervous chuckles followed, thin and uneasy, until someone dared to break the tension. A man at the back muttered too loudly, "Wrong party, old man." Another covered her smirk behind jeweled fingers. A woman snorted into her glass, amused at the absurdity. And then she laughed. Not because she found it funny, not because there was joy in the moment, but because she had to. Every eye was on her, waiting to see how she would react. Would she look horrified? Would she shrink? Would she ignore him and let the room decide? No. She lifted her chin, curled her lips into a sharp smile, and laughed. The sound cut through the room like glass. It wasn't joy. It was command. And everyone followed. Her laugh gave them permission. So they laughed too. For a heartbeat, she felt it. Power. The same power she had been chasing her entire life. The power to control the story, to steer the moment, to show everyone that even this interruption couldn't shake her, that she was untouchable. But the beggar didn't flinch. He didn't bow his head or shuffle away. He didn't retreat into the night, embarrassed. He didn't mutter apologies for intruding. No. He stepped forward. One step, then another, each one deliberate, unhurried. He moved as though he couldn't even hear the laughter, as though he was moving to a rhythm that no one else could hear. The sound in the room began to falter. Chuckles died in throats. The whispers fell quiet, strangled by confusion. Guests shifted in their seats, their spines tightening as unease seeped into the space. And slowly, the spotlight of attention, once hers, shifted. It followed him. Even she felt it. The silk of her dress clung tighter, suffocating instead of flattering. The jewelry that sparkled on her wrists suddenly felt heavy. Her smile quivered at the edges, her control slipping. The spotlight that had always belonged to her was being pulled away, stolen by the one man no one had invited, no one had expected. Because he didn't walk like a beggar. He didn't carry himself like a man who didn't belong. No. He moved like a man who knew exactly where he was going. And with each step it became clearer. He was walking toward her. The distance shrank, and so did her certainty. Guests who had admired her minutes before now leaned forward, eyes locked on him. Their curiosity wasn't about her anymore. It belonged to him. The whispers weren't about her dress, her glow, her perfection. They were about the stranger who had stolen her stage, and though she didn't realize it yet, he wasn't just walking toward her. He was walking toward everything she had buried, every secret she had covered, every fragment of the life she had sworn to erase. Because the truth wasn't waiting outside anymore. It had entered the room. It had crossed the floor. And with every step, it was closing in. He did not stop. The man kept walking, each step grinding the dust of the streets into the floor that had been polished to a mirror sheen just for this night. He walked past the tables dressed in silk linens, where ribbon-tied favors were lined up like jewels waiting to be admired. He walked past the mountain of gifts wrapped in shimmering gold paper and giant bows, each one meant to declare how loved, how admired, how celebrated she was. He walked past the guests, who sat frozen in their chairs, their laughter now shriveled into silence, their smiles stiff with confusion. Every step he took grew heavier, not with clumsiness but with purpose, as though the gravity of the room had shifted and settled entirely onto his shoulders. And, impossibly, he carried it with ease. She expected someone to intervene. Surely someone would stop him, block his path, push him back out into the night where he belonged. That was the reason she had staff, wasn't it? That was why she had insisted on security at the door. Men in pressed suits who were supposed to keep this kind of interruption far away from her carefully crafted life. Yet no one moved. Not the servers balancing trays of champagne flutes. Not the men whose job was order. Not even her closest friends. They sat still, their eyes wide, their fingers frozen around the stems of their glasses. Their stillness was worse than action. It was as though they were not watching an intrusion at all, but an inevitability. Something meant to happen. Something none of them dared to interrupt. And then he reached the stage. Her stage. The centerpiece of the entire celebration. The place she had been meant to sit, radiant and adored, glowing like a queen on her throne while every camera flash immortalized her perfection. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks. She had pictured the way the spotlight would catch her hair, the way her practiced smile would shine brighter than the chandeliers above, the way every guest would leave whispering about how flawless, how untouchable she was. But now, it was not her standing there. It was him. A man draped in rags, marked by hardship, breathing in the spotlight she had claimed as hers. He did not falter. His hand rose slowly, hovering above the microphone. For a heartbeat, she thought the weight of so many eyes might crush him, that he would remember his place and retreat, that he would bow his head in shame and shuffle backward into the shadows. She prayed for it. The guests expected it. The entire room seemed to hang suspended on the hope that this stranger would break beneath their gaze, but he did not. Instead, he wrapped his scarred fingers around the microphone, and with that single act, the room changed. The laughter that had lingered in the corners died instantly, cut short mid-breath. The whispers evaporated as though someone had stolen the air itself. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner vanished beneath the sharpness of silence. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, heavy and suffocating. The kind of silence that demanded attention. He lifted the microphone slowly, carefully, as though it wasn't just a tool, but something much heavier. In his grip, it became a weapon, a key, a vessel for a truth he had carried with him long before this night. His hands were scarred, his knuckles thinned by hardship, his skin weathered by years of storms and hunger, yet his grip did not tremble. No, it was firm. Too firm for a man the world dismissed as a beggar. He breathed once, twice, and the speakers crackled alive with static. Then his voice filled the room. "You don't know me." It was not the voice anyone expected. It wasn't weak. It wasn't ragged. It wasn't the trembling rasp of a man broken by the world. It was clear, steady, strong, resonant enough to make every guest in the room freeze, their attention locked, their discomfort growing by the second. Each word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, rippling outward, unavoidable. "But he continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her and refused to move. "I know you." The shift was immediate. Unease rippled across the guests like a tremor running through the floor. Some glanced at one another, brows furrowed, searching for meaning. Some crossed their arms and leaned back as though they could protect themselves with indifference. Others leaned forward, drawn by the sharp gravity in his tone, their curiosity stronger than their doubt. A few even tried to laugh, thin and brittle sounds that cracked in the air and died almost immediately. Because this man, this beggar, did not sound like someone lost. He did not sound like someone out of place. He sounded like someone who had come here with a reason, with a mission, with words too heavy to ignore. And through it all, his eyes never left her. Her heart stuttered, beating unevenly in her chest. Her throat tightened until it was hard to breathe. The mask she had been wearing all night, the smile she had polished and rehearsed until it looked effortless, slipped. And she knew in her bones that the slip was visible. The cracks were showing. The audience that once saw her as perfect now saw something else, something breaking. "You laughed at me," he said, his voice cutting sharper, each syllable delivered with precision, each one slicing through the air like a blade against glass. "But before you laugh again, perhaps you should remember where you came from." The words pierced her deeper than she could have prepared for. They were not random. They were not vague. They were precise. A blade aimed at the very part of her she had buried for years. The guests gasped, startled by the boldness of the statement. Some turned their heads, waiting for her to deny it, to laugh again, to take control back with a single sharp smile. But she couldn't. She sat frozen, her breath uneven, her nails digging into her lap. Because she knew. She knew exactly what he meant. He was not just anyone. He was not just a man who had wandered into the wrong party. He was not simply a beggar who had stolen a microphone. He was more. He was the living embodiment of everything she had tried to erase, everything she had fought to bury beneath silk and jewels and perfect smiles. And now, in front of every single person she had gathered to prove her worth, he was going to drag it into the light. And with every word that followed, she knew he was going to unearth it all. His words hung in the air, sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence that had settled over the room. "I know you." The sound of it echoed, bouncing from one trembling guest to the next, but it did not belong to them. It belonged to her. Every syllable felt like a stone crashing into her chest, breaking open a part of herself she had spent years locking away. The room didn't understand yet. The guests whispered, their brows furrowed, their lips curling in doubt or curiosity. But she understood. She knew that this man's words weren't guesses or coincidences. They were memories, her memories. He cleared his throat, his voice steady and unyielding, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are not always the woman you pretend to be," he said, his tone low but resonant, the kind of tone that carried weight because it was truth. "I remember when you were small. I remember the shoes with holes in the soles. I remember clothes that smelled of soap and rain because your mother washed them by hand. I remember the way you kept your head down so no one could see the shame in your eyes." Her chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. The words were too precise, too vivid to be anything but real. They struck like blades, reopening scars she had told herself were long healed. Whispers rippled across the room as her guests exchanged glances. Some smirked, convinced this was nothing but a cruel performance. Others leaned forward, intrigued, hungry for more. And though their faces blurred together, one thing was clear: they were watching her. Watching to see if she would deny it, laugh it off, reclaim control. But she couldn't, because every word he spoke was true. And then he went further. "Do you think I don't remember those afternoons after school?" His voice carried like thunder across the silent room. When you sat alone on the curb, your backpack worn thin, your eyes fixed on the ground because you were too embarrassed to let anyone see where you lived. You dreamed of being seen. You dreamed of being chosen. You dreamed of being more than the girl with nothing. But tell me, what changed? Did the money make you forget the hunger? Did the silk erase the tears? Her throat closed. Her heart pounded against her ribs so violently she thought it might break them. His words weren't just truth. They were the truths she had buried deepest, the ones she swore she would never let see the light of day. Her body trembled in the chair as images she had fought to bury flooded back. The tiny house with peeling paint that always smelled faintly of damp wood. The one bedroom shared by too many. The nights when dinner was bread soaked in broth, when she prayed the growling in her stomach wouldn't keep her awake. The hand-me-down dresses that never fit, seams digging into her skin while classmates laughed and pointed. The way she kept walking anyway, even when the laughter felt like knives. And worst of all, her father's weary eyes, lined with exhaustion, always trying but never able to give more than the bare minimum. She had tried so hard to bury those nights. She had built an empire of smiles and silks just to cover them. But here they were again, stripped bare in front of every guest. She dug her nails into the fabric of her chair, gripping so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream at him, to shout that he was lying, that he had no right to speak of things he couldn't possibly know. But she couldn't, because he did know. Every word was true, and no denial could smother the sting of recognition flooding her body. The fear began to sink in, not fear of him, but fear of herself. Fear that no matter how far she had climbed, no matter how many layers of wealth and appearances she had piled on, she would never really outrun that girl. That small, hungry, invisible girl who still lived inside her, waiting for moments like this to claw her way back to the surface. The beggar leaned closer to the microphone, his voice softer now, but sharper than ever. You laugh at me because when you look at me, you see her. The reflection you hate most, the one you've been running from. But you cannot laugh away your roots. You cannot bury the truth of who you were. And no matter how many walls you build, she still lives inside you. The decorations blurred in her vision, the balloons, the ribbons, the carefully arranged flowers, all of it, began to dissolve into meaningless clutter. For the first time in years, she wasn't the woman in the silk dress with the perfect smile. She wasn't the queen of the stage. She was the girl he remembered. The girl she had sworn to erase. The girl who wanted so desperately to be someone else. And in that moment, surrounded by whispers, stares, and the heavy silence of judgment, she knew this man wasn't just a beggar. He wasn't just a voice. He was her past, returned to life, standing before her and demanding to be seen. His voice did not waver. His body might have been thin, his clothes torn, his shoes falling apart, but his presence towered over the entire room. He stood there with the microphone clutched in his scarred hand, and every word he spoke hit harder than the decorations, harder than the gifts, harder than the carefully built image she had wrapped herself in. It was as though he had become something larger than a man in rags, something closer to a prophet, or a mirror held up against the life she thought she had buried. "You mocked me," he said again, his tone steady, sharp, precise. Not loud, not raging, but sharp enough to cut. "But tell me, was it really me you mocked, or was it yourself?" The question landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through the crowd. Guests shifted in their seats. Murmurs stirred. Nervous chuckles flickered and died in the air. Some leaned forward, curious now, pulled by the weight of his words even as they resisted believing them. Others frowned, disturbed but unable to look away. And at the center of it all, she sat frozen, because she knew the truth of what he said. She felt it crawling up her spine. His gaze never left her. His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing as though he was seeing through her dress, through her skin, down to the very bones of her past. When you looked at me, he continued, you didn't just see a stranger in rags. You saw yourself. You saw the ghost of the girl you used to be, the girl with patched shoes, the girl with a trembling voice, the girl who lowered her head so no one would see her shame. And you hated her. You hated that she existed. You hated that she still breathes inside you. And so, when you laughed at me, you were not mocking me. You were mocking her. You were mocking yourself. Her stomach twisted violently, her throat thick with a knot she couldn't swallow down. His words dragged up memories she had chained in the dark corners of her mind. She could almost hear the laughter of her childhood classmates again, ringing in her ears like cruel bells. She could feel the sting of their whispers when she wore hand-me-downs that never fit. She remembered pressing her back against the cracked walls of her childhood home, promising herself with clenched fists and tear-streaked cheeks that one day, no one would ever laugh at her again. And yet, here she was, a baby shower built to prove her triumph, a stage dressed in ribbons and silk, and still one voice had undone it all, dragging that girl back into the room. The beggar's grip tightened on the microphone. His voice softened, but it carried even heavier now, as if his words were made of stone. You thought your laugh was power. You thought it erased what you once were. But don't you see? That laugh betrayed you. It showed everyone here that no matter how many jewels you wear, no matter how many photos you pose for, the shame you carry still lives inside you. It's not me you tried to bury, it's her. It's yourself. A chill swept over her body, crawling under her skin until she shivered in the warmth of the chandelier light. She wanted to deny him, to scream out, "You don't know me." But the truth was undeniable. He did know her. He knew the exact shape of her shame, the exact weight of her silence, the exact fear that had driven her to build this perfect illusion in the first place. The guests fidgeted. Some crossed their legs, some shifted their glasses, some whispered questions under their breath. What's he talking about? Why isn't she stopping him? The voices stung almost as much as his words, because with every second she failed to stand, every second she failed to push him out, they began to see it too. They began to notice the cracks. The silk of her dress clung to her like chains instead of armor. The glitter of her jewelry weighed her down like stones tied around her wrists. Even her smile, the mask she had worn for years, had abandoned her. Her lips trembled. Her jaw shook. The mask was broken, and everyone could see it. The beggar leaned closer, his voice now a low, unrelenting fire. Shame doesn't vanish just because you cover it with money. It doesn't dissolve because you bury it under perfect photos and parties. Shame doesn't die, it lingers. It follows. It waits. And every time you laugh at someone like me, you are not seeing us. You are seeing yourself. You laugh because you are afraid. You laugh to silence the echo of the truth you cannot face. The silence in the room was suffocating now. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loudly. His words were too heavy, pressing down on every chest in the room, dragging even the spectators into the weight of her unraveling. And then came the blow that left her trembling. But laughter cannot bury truth. It only reveals it. And your truth is this: you are still that girl. The one who felt small. The one who felt less. The one who wanted more. No matter how many walls you build, no matter how many people you gather to applaud you, she lives in you still. And until you face her, you will never be free. Her vision blurred. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she clenched her fists, refusing to let them fall. Her nails dug into her palms until pain seared through her skin. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear behind the decorations and the gifts and the shallow applause. But there was no hiding now. The mirror had been lifted, and the reflection staring back at her was the one she had sworn never to see again. In that moment, she understood the most painful truth. He wasn't humiliating her. He wasn't here to destroy her. He wasn't mocking her as she had mocked him. No, he was showing her herself. And the reflection that glared back at her through his words was the one she had spent her whole life trying to erase. The beggar did not lower the microphone. His hand remained steady, his body rooted in place as if he had grown from the floor itself, unmovable, undeniable. His voice carried not like a plea, not like the broken rambling of a man in rags, but like a verdict being delivered in a courtroom where every soul in the room was the jury. His presence had already overturned the celebration, transforming the baby shower into something unrecognizable, something raw. And then he spoke again, and his words were heavier than anything he had said before. "You think image is everything," he said, his tone slicing through the silence like a blade through silk. His eyes swept across the room, but they always returned to her, pinning her in place. "You have built your life on appearances, on what people think of you when they walk into your home, on what they whisper about you when they leave, on how the photographs look when they are passed around at dinner tables, on the compliments that float like perfume in the air. But image." He paused, letting the words stretch, letting the silence grow unbearable. Image is the most fragile thing in the world. One tear, one crack, one slip of the mask, and it all shatters. The guests sat in stunned stillness, their hands frozen around glasses of champagne, their eyes locked on him as though they had forgotten how to blink. For the first time, some of them looked ashamed, as though his words weren't just for her, but for them too. Still, his gaze never wavered from her, and she felt like every syllable was a hammer pounding against the hollow walls she had built around herself. He took a step forward, and the torn hem of his pants brushed against the polished stage. The chandeliers above flickered, or perhaps it only seemed so, but it added weight to his next words. "A photograph can be torn," he said. "A smile can be faked. A dress can fade. A house can crumble. And when the glitter is gone, when the guests leave, when the applause fades, who are you then? Who are you when there is nothing left to hide behind?" The question wasn't shouted, but it echoed louder than any scream. It reverberated inside her, pounding against her ribs until she felt hollow. She knew the answer, and that was what terrified her. Because when the lights dimmed, when the guests went home, when the makeup smeared and the dresses came off, she didn't always know who she was. She just knew who she was supposed to pretend to be. The beggar lifted his scarred hand, sweeping it across the room, pointing not at her, but at everything she had assembled to hold up the image. "All of this," he said, his voice rising like a storm, "all of this is theater. The balloons, the ribbons, the cake so tall it could be a tower, the carefully chosen playlist, the endless photographs. This is not for your child. This is not for your family. This is not even for you. It is for them." He gestured to the crowd, to the rows of eager faces, to the whispers barely contained in their throats. For the eyes that watch, for the mouths that gossip, for the stories that spread when you are not in the room. This is not a celebration. This is camouflage. This is disguise. The murmurs that followed were uneasy, jagged. Some guests glanced at each other, uncomfortable but unwilling to look away. Others tilted their glasses to their lips, drinking not out of thirst but to avoid confronting the truth lingering in the air. And, at the center of it all, she sat frozen, her face pale, her body trembling. Every word he spoke ripped another thread from the fabric she had stitched around herself. He did not stop. He would not stop. His voice dropped lower, softer, but somehow heavier, as though the weight of his words pressed against every chest in the room. "You laugh at me because I wear my poverty on the outside," he said. "I do not hide it. I do not dress it in jewels. I do not bury it under chandeliers and champagne. You laugh at me because I show you openly what you spend your life trying to cover. But you," his eyes snapped back to her, burning with truth. "Your poverty is not of money. Your poverty is of truth. Your poverty is of peace. You have riches piled on your table, but hunger carved into your soul, and no mask, no silk, no staged photograph can feed it." Gasps spilled through the room. A woman covered her mouth. A man shook his head. Someone whispered, "How dare he?" But no one rose to stop him. No one moved to take the microphone from his hands, because even those who resisted the words could feel it, the truth thrumming through the air like a current too strong to ignore. And still, he pressed on. "Image is a prison," he said, his voice breaking into a whisper that carried louder than a shout. "And you have built the walls yourself, brick by brick, smile by smile, photograph by photograph. And now you sit here in the middle of this prison, dressed like a queen, while your guests clap as if they are your guards. Tell me, how many of them know you, truly know you? How many would stay if the mask fell? How many would clap if they saw the scars you still carry?" The silence that followed was unbearable. She felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, pressing her down, demanding an answer she could not give. The silk of her dress clung to her skin like a shroud. Her jewelry no longer gleamed, it shackled. Her smile had vanished entirely, leaving only trembling lips and wide, panicked eyes. And then came the final strike. The blow that landed so hard the room itself seemed to shudder. "Image is not truth," he said, "and truth cannot be buried forever. You can laugh at it. You can dress it up. You can drown it in applause and champagne. But one day, it will stand before you. And when it does, it will strip everything away, and you will be left naked, face to face with yourself." Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard it hurt. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces painted with unease, shame, or pity. The chandeliers flickered again, the air pressed heavy, and she realized this was the moment she had feared her entire life. The truth had walked into her perfect room, grabbed the microphone, and left her exposed in front of them all. The beggar's voice lowered now, no longer sharp, no longer slicing, but steady controlled, deliberate, heavier than before. It wasn't the shout of an outsider or the rambling of a madman. It was something else, something intimate, something that pulled every ear in the room closer. He stood in his rags, scarred hands clutching the microphone, yet somehow he felt larger than the chandeliers, larger than the walls, larger than the very house itself. and then he spoke words that shifted everything. "I know you." The room reacted instantly. A ripple of gasps broke the silence, followed by whispers darting from mouth to mouth like sparks from dry wood. Guests leaned toward one another, brows furrowed, lips trembling with half-formed questions. What does he mean? How could he know her? Is this some kind of act? Confusion tightened the air, but beneath it was something sharper curiosity, the kind that pricks at the skin and refuses to let go. But she didn't whisper. She didn't move. Because from the moment the words left his lips, she knew. Not the way the others guessed or speculated, but deep in her chest, in the place she had tried to bury. His voice carried a weight of memory, and her body recognized it before her mind could catch up. The beggar didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, his ragged clothes swaying against his thin frame, and his voice filled the room with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much to ever lie. "I don't know you because of gossip. I don't know you because of stories told by others. I know you because I was there." The guests erupted in murmurs. "There? Where?" one woman hissed. "This is ridiculous," a man muttered, though his eyes never left the beggar. The whispers rose and fell, clashing like waves in a storm. But the beggar's voice cut through it all, firm and unyielding. "I remember your street," he said, and the words fell like stones into her chest. The narrow road, broken with cracks, the houses with peeling paint, leaning fences, roofs patched with tar. I remember yours, a small place, worn thin by years of storms, but still standing because it had to. Because inside, it lived a family that clung to hope even when hope was thinner than bread. The room went still again. The whispers died. Every eye turned from him to her, searching her face for denial, for defiance, for something. But she couldn't hide it. The truth was carved into her features, into the way her shoulders stiffened, into the way her eyes darted away. The beggar's voice softened, almost reverent. "I remember your mother's hands, red and raw from scrubbing clothes in cold water. Fingers bent from mending the same fabric again and again, stitching scraps into something wearable because there was no money to buy more. I remember how she still smiled at you, even with tired eyes, because she wanted you to believe life would give you more than it had given her." Her chest caved inward, as though the words had knocked the air from her lungs. She could see it again, the basin of water. Her mother bent over it, humming softly while her hands bled from the cold. She thought no one else had noticed, that those memories were hers alone. And yet, here he was, speaking them aloud, dragging them into the light in front of everyone. But he wasn't finished. "And I remember your father," he said, his voice steady but trembling with something deeper. "The cough that rattled his lungs at night. The way you lay awake, covering your ears, praying he'd make it to morning. The way his body bent from long hours of work. The way he tried. God, how he tried to give you more than he had. Do not tell me I don't know you. I was there. I saw it. I lived it beside you." The room gasped as though struck by lightning. Some of the guests leaned back, eyes wide with disbelief. Others shook their heads, muttering about impossibilities. But none of that mattered. Not to her. Because every word he spoke was real, true, and undeniable. Her throat locked. Her hands trembled in her lap. She tried to speak, tried to push back against the memories, but the sound caught in her throat. He knew her. He knew everything she had tried to bury beneath silk and chandeliers. He had not guessed. He had remembered. Then his voice changed again. quieter, softer, almost breaking. Your father. He stopped, swallowing, hard, as though the memory itself was heavy. Your father was kind to me. The words froze her blood. Her entire body stiffened. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Around the room, gasps burst like fireworks. A man muttered. What did he say? A woman clutched her necklace as though it might protect her from the weight of his truth. The beggar's eyes glistened now, but his voice held firm. When I was nothing, when the world spat on me, when I had nothing but hunger in my belly and dust on my shoes, it was your father who gave me bread. It was your father who put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't give up. Life can be cruel, but kindness is never wasted." The room fell into stunned silence, but inside her chest a storm raged. Because she remembered. She remembered her father's voice, his words, his hands rough but gentle as they steadied her. He had always said kindness was the only wealth worth keeping. She had buried those words along with the girl she used to be, but here they were again, alive in the mouth of a beggar. Tears blurred her vision. Her guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering in disbelief, others watching her with new eyes, hungry eyes, judging eyes. But she didn't care about them any more. All she could see was her father's face. All she could hear was his voice. And now this man, this beggar, stood in front of her as living proof that her father's kindness had not been wasted. It had endured. It had survived. The beggar lifted his head, his voice steady but softened by something almost like mercy. So, yes, I know you. I know the house that raised you. I know the love that shaped you. I know the shame you tried to bury and the hunger that chased you. You can laugh at me all you want, but you cannot laugh away the truth of who you are, because I carry it, and tonight I give it back to you. The words struck her harder than any laugh, harder than any whisper. She was trembling now, her body shaking under the weight of the truth she could no longer deny. The decorations blurred, the towering cake looked absurd, the gifts glittered with emptiness. None of it mattered. None of it could shield her from what he had just returned to her. And in that moment she understood. He hadn't come by accident. He hadn't stumbled into her perfect party by mistake. He had come with purpose, with memory, with truth. He was not here to break her life apart. He was here to give her back the part of herself she had abandoned. The silence that followed his words was unbearable. It pressed down like a heavy stone, squeezing the air out of the room. For a moment, no one dared move. The chandeliers glimmered, the candles flickered, but all of it seemed distant, irrelevant. The only thing alive in the room was the echo of his truth. Then, slowly, whispers began. A voice at the back asked, "Did you hear that?" He said he knew her father. Another voice, nervous, added, "But how could he know so much?" The whispers spread, multiplying like sparks catching fire. Some voices carried doubt, others carried mockery, and all of them pointed in one direction, her. Eyes turned, one by one, until every gaze pinned her to her seat. Gone was the admiration, the envy, the warm smiles. In their place bloomed suspicion, confusion, and, on a few faces, cruel satisfaction. Some of these people were almost enjoying it. They leaned closer, whispering behind polished hands, feeding on the spectacle. And then the question came. A woman near the front, her voice cutting through the murmurs, asked coldly, "Is it true?" The room held its breath. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her silence was louder than any denial. And that silence was all the crowd needed. gasps rippled across the room. Some exchanged smug glances, others shook their heads in judgment, and a few even laughed softly, cruelly, as though her mask slipping was the entertainment they had been waiting for. Even her closest friends, the ones who had stood beside her only minutes before, now looked uneasy. Some stepped back, some averted their eyes as though her shame might cling to them. Betrayal burned sharper than any words. The decorations mocked her now. The ribbons, the glittering cake, the mountain of gifts, none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. Because in the eyes of her guests, the illusion had cracked. And once it cracked, it could never be put back together. The beggar said nothing more. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier than their whispers. He simply stood there, eyes locked on her, while the room itself twisted the knife. And in that moment, trembling in her chair, her heart pounding like a drum she couldn't silence, one thought consumed her. This was supposed to be my perfect day. And now it is slipping away in front of them all. It started small, almost unnoticeable, a tremor beneath her ribs, a spark of anger fluttering like a trapped bird inside her chest. She tried to steady her breath, tried to keep the mask glued to her face, but the whispers cut deeper with every second. The smirks, the raised brows, the sharp edges of their questions, they pressed against her like knives. Her heart pounded louder and louder until it felt like the whole room must hear it. And then something inside her snapped. Her hand slammed down against the table with a force that startled even her. Glasses clattered, silverware jumped, plates trembled on porcelain, and one fork spun off the edge, clanging against the floor. The sharp crack of it echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Conversations died mid-word. Nervous laughter dissolved into silence. Every head whipped toward her at once. For the first time since the beggar had spoken, the spotlight returned to her, not warm, not adoring, but harsh, merciless, and unblinking. Enough. The word tore from her throat, raw and jagged, like it had been clawing its way out for years. It wasn't just a command, it was a cry. Her chest heaved, her shoulders shook, but there was no stopping it now. The dam had broken, and the flood was rushing out. She rose from her chair, trembling, her silk dress clinging uncomfortably to her damp skin. Tears she hadn't even felt gathering streaked down her cheeks, cutting through the carefully painted mask she'd worn all evening. Her voice shook at first, but then it caught fire. "You think you know me," she shouted, her words ricocheting off the chandeliers. "You sit there in your perfect clothes, sipping champagne like royalty, pretending you're above me, pretending you're better. But you don't know me. None of you do." The crowd stiffened. Some shifted uneasily in their seats, eyes darting anywhere but her face. Others leaned forward, hungry for the collapse, their smiles sharp and eager. Their silence wasn't supportive, it was demanding, pulling the truth out of her like vultures picking at bones. And still, she spoke. "I grew up with nothing," she cried, her voice breaking but unrelenting. "I walked to school in shoes with holes in the soles, praying it wouldn't rain because I couldn't stand showing my classmates my wet socks. I went to bed hungry more nights than I can count. I watched my mother cry herself to sleep, her hands cracked and bleeding from scrubbing and sewing, praying life would give me more than it ever gave her. I watched my father work himself to the bone, coughing in the night, giving everything he had just so I could survive another day. That was my childhood. That was my life." Gasps rippled through the room. A few guests exchanged guilty glances as though realizing they had never truly known the woman they envied. But others smirked still, some hiding laughter behind their glasses, feeding off her unraveling. Their stares burned into her skin, but the truth was hotter. I built this life with my own hands, she continued, sweeping her arm across the room. Every ribbon, every balloon, every flower on these tables, I bled for it. I scraped it from nothing. I clawed it out of the dirt. You think this was handed to me? No, I fought for it. I earned every single piece. Her hand shot toward the beggar, her finger trembling but resolute. And him, he knows. He saw me when I had nothing, when I was invisible, when I was small. He saw the hunger in my stomach and the shame in my eyes. And yes, she choked on the words but forced them out. Louder, fiercer. I laughed at him. I laughed because I thought I had finally outrun who I was, because I wanted to believe I had buried that girl so deep she'd never claw her way back. She staggered a step forward, her chest heaving, her voice now raw with tears. But she's still here. She never left. She's inside me. And I hated her. I hated her for being poor. I hated her for being weak. I hated her for being invisible. I thought if I built all this, her eyes swept the glittering room, the bows, the cake, the gifts. I thought if I built it big enough, beautiful enough, I could finally kill her. But I can't. She's me, and she always will be. Her voice broke at last, tears streaming freely, but she did not crumble. She stood there trembling, stripped bare, her secrets laid out in the open for everyone to see. Some guests looked down in shame, unable to meet her eyes. Others stared wide-eyed, stunned into silence. A few still whispered, their mouths twisted with cruelty, but their laughter no longer carried weight. The beggar stood silently, his gaze fixed on her, not mocking, not triumphant, but steady, almost tender. His silence was louder than their judgment, his presence heavier than their whispers. And she knew it then. This wasn't just a collapse. This wasn't just humiliation. This was the moment the mask shattered. The breaking point not only of the baby shower, not only of her reputation, but of the very life she thought she had built. Whatever came next would define her forever. The silence after her eruption was unbearable. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of judgment, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on every soul in the room. She stood there trembling, tears streaking her cheeks, her chest heaving with the force of what she had just confessed. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. She was simply herself raw, exposed, stripped bare. And then, slowly, the beggar raised the microphone again. His scarred hand wrapped around it with the same steady grip, but his eyes were softer now. No longer cutting, no longer burning with confrontation. They carried something else, understanding. Compassion. Truth. "You are not your shame," he said, his voice calm, steady, carrying through the hall like the toll of a bell. "You are your survival." The words hung in the air, sinking deeper than any accusation could. The crowd leaned forward, caught between disbelief and awe. Some dabbed at their eyes, others shook their heads as if trying to resist the pull of his voice. But no one could deny it any more. He was no ordinary intruder. He spoke with the weight of someone who had carried this truth for years, waiting for the moment to release it. "You think you hated that girl," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But that girl, the one who walked with holes in her shoes, the one who went to bed hungry, the one who kept going when life gave her nothing, that girl was never weak. That girl was strong. Stronger than anyone in this room will ever know. She was the one who carried you here. She was the one who kept you alive when the world wanted you invisible. And instead of hating her, you should thank her. You should honor her, because without her, you would not be standing here today. Her knees almost buckled. The tears she had fought so long to hide came freely now, dripping hot onto her trembling hands. His words weren't sharp anymore. They were gentle, but they cut deeper than any blade. "You laughed at me," he said, his voice dropping softer, almost tender. "But you did not laugh at me. You laughed at the reflection you feared the most. You thought mocking me would silence her. But the truth is, she has always been your strength. And no amount of silk, no amount of glitter, no amount of photographs will ever erase that. The sooner you see it, the sooner you will be free." The guests sat frozen, their perfect posture collapsing under the weight of his words. Some cried silently, others stared as though they were seeing her for the first time. Even those who smirked before now shifted uneasily, unable to sneer in the presence of such undeniable truth. And then came the revelation that shook her deeper than anything else. His voice softened further, reverent, carrying memory. "Your father was kind to me." The air in the room cracked. Gasps rippled through the crowd and she froze. Her chest tightened so violently it hurt. He nodded slowly, his voice trembling just slightly now, not with weakness but with respect. "When I was nothing," he said, "when I had dust on my shoes and hunger in my stomach, it was your father who placed bread in my hand. It was your father who told me, 'Don't give up. Kindness is never wasted.' I never forgot those words. They carried me when I had nothing else, and tonight I give them back to you." Her vision blurred, not from shame but from overwhelming recognition. She remembered her father's voice, his quiet strength, his belief in giving even when there was almost nothing left to give. And now, years later, standing in the glow of chandeliers, surrounded by ribbons and glittering gifts, that kindness had returned not as a memory, but as a living truth, carried by the very man she had mocked. The beggar lowered the microphone, his voice steady but soft. "So, laugh at me if you must. But understand this, you cannot laugh away your roots. You cannot bury the truth, and you cannot kill the part of you that survived. That part is your gift. That part is your strength. That part is your truth." The silence that followed was different now. Not cruel, not judgmental. It was reverent, heavy with the weight of revelation. For the first time, her guests were not looking at the silk or the ribbons or the glittering displays. They were looking at her, the real her. And in that moment, she realized he hadn't come to humiliate her. He had come to remind her, to give her back what she had spent years trying to bury.